Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Frank and Candid on this Thursday morning. Good looking day it is. My name is Tony Nias. Glad to have you. We begin as usual. We go to what's in the news. Cuba started a mass vaccination campaign against COVID-19 just yesterday, using one of its 5 homegrown vaccine candidates, which, if proven effective, could improve access to inoculations across Latin America, one of the regions hardest hit by the pandemic. Cuba's state-run biopharma sector, which has a long history of developing, producing, and exporting serums, has concluded late-phase trials at home for the vaccine Abdala in more than 48,000 volunteers, but not yet published the results. Still, it says the advantages of starting mass vaccination outweigh the risk, given the shot has proven safe and effective in generating antibodies, and Cuba is facing its worst COVID-19 outbreak since the start of the pandemic. If Cuba's homegrown vaccines prove successful, it will mark a major achievement for the small country and a ray of hope for its allies and developing countries struggling with inequitable global vaccine access. Other countries in Latin America, including Bolivia, Argentina, and Mexico, have already expressed interest in acquiring or even producing the Cuban vaccines. So we continue to follow what's on tap with the Cuban vaccines. They are producing 5 at the moment. Okay, and speaking of vaccines and vaccination, there are a whole lot, if you look across the world, there are whole lots of incentive and programs that people are coming up with to get people vaccinated. And I come across an interesting story this morning in the United States, Ohio. I shared with you earlier in the week a program from Massachusetts and one from New Jersey. Now here's one from Ohio. Ohio Lottery to give 5 people $1 million each to encourage vaccination. How about that? To bolster slumping demand for the vaccine, the state will use federal coronavirus relief funds to pay for a weekly lottery beginning on May 26. To the many propositions that governments have used to try to bolster slumping demand for the coronavirus vaccine, the governor there, Mike DeWine, raised the ante yesterday, announcing that the state would give 5 people $1 million each in return for having been vaccinated as part of a weekly lottery program. I say, wow, okay. They really want you vaccinated, so that's really raising the ante there. Apart from giving a beer, here's somebody giving $1 million to get vaccinated. Interesting. Okay. All right. We, this morning, will continue as we work our way towards, in this month of May, towards a African Liberation Day later this month. We continue our discussion on the African continent, our ancestors, their history, their continued plight. And so this morning, in continuing that, we go back and look at some of the things we talked about when it comes to Africa and how the continent and the countries they are faring, even with wealth in other ways, in other respect. And we talk about what are the reasons for the continent, the state of the continent today. We, from time to time, talk about different reasons. Some people, have all kinds of reasons. There's a wide spectrum. And so we are going to examine yet another culprit, another person or another group that shares some responsibility. So the question, as usual, is why is it that arguably the world's richest continent in terms of natural resources has some of the world's poorest people? That's always the question. Now, I know many of us have little to no patience at all for history or have any interest in the impact of past events on the realities of the present. However, there is no other way to understand Africa today without considering the history of the continent. That's just the reality. Although the African continent is blessed with gold, diamonds, oil, bauxite, uranium, iron ore, and other valuable resources, the inhabitants are among the world's poorest. We understand that. Now, it is true that a few sub-Saharan African nations are doing relatively well, but most are mired in poverty. And the fact that the continent and its abundant natural resources can, in so many cases, have so little effect on its people and their quality of life over so many years is one of the great mysteries surrounding most of the African nations. Everyone seems to have an explanation. Some say it's corruption. Others say dysfunctional democratic institutions and justice systems, greedy multinational corporations. Some say shady local and international elites. Some talk about resource wars by domestic militias and the vestiges of colonialism. Others say it is the advent of the new type of colonialism driven by players like China and Israel. Now, however, let us not ignore that there is the geopolitical games that are being played with Africa. And who is involved in that game? The World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, they were set up during the end of the Second World War. And they were set up to rebuild the economies of Europe. However, in order for the World Bank and the IMF to implement their policies, they began offering loans to poor countries, but only if the poor countries privatized their economies and allowed Western corporations free access to their raw materials and their markets. That was, in effect, a poverty trap. And many poor countries realized it, but they realized it when it was too late. They were already in chains by the time they realized this. And that was the beginning of much of the problems Africa faces today. Now, as it is, they're in a vicious cycle of poverty, and there seems to be no way out. The Western corporations flourish, while the poor continue to die in poverty. In other words, the poor in Africa continue to feed the greedy rich corporations in the Western world. The poor get poorer, while the rich get richer. People continue to die from extreme poverty and hunger in Africa and other parts of the world. But not so many people know that the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO bear some of that responsibility. Remember the IMF. Remember the Jamaica experience, which we'll talk about some other time. But let's stay with Africa. The World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO has been behind a lot of what's happening in Africa. It is a new form of war whereby the rich Western corporations use hunger and debts as weapons of mass destruction. In other words, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO are the triple enemies of progress in almost every developing country in the world. Now let's see how the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO operate in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Take a country like Ghana, for example. Ghana is blessed with an abundance of natural resources. The World Bank and the IMF are very interested in countries such as Ghana, where they can easily control the natural resources and the markets. There used to be some prosperous rice farming communities in the northern parts of Ghana. And the government of Ghana used to give those rice producing farmers some farming subsidies to enable them to produce rice on a large scale to help feed the nation. However, the World Bank and the IMF stepped in and told the Ghana government that they, the World Bank and the IMF, would not give Ghana any more loans unless their government cut the farming subsidies the government was giving to the poor rice farmers. Right? And the main reason behind that was that Ghana was instead to import rice from Western countries such as the United States, which is a major partner of the World Bank and the IMF. Now, Ghana now imports most of its rice from abroad at huge prices every year. So at the end of the day, Ghana owes the World Bank and the IMF huge amounts of money, but the money did not remain in the Ghanaian economy because Ghana had to use the loan that they got from the IMF and the World Bank to import food from abroad. Meanwhile, the rice producing communities in Ghana could have helped produce enough rice to feed the nation and even export some abroad to make a profit. Now, the northern communities in Ghana remain the poorest in the country, with no better jobs and no opportunities at all in most parts. Nowadays, young boys and girls, some as young as 9, are migrating to the southern parts of the country into major cities such as Accra, which is a dangerous journey in itself, all in search for jobs so they can take care of their poor dying families back home. Most of these kids never return home. Some die along the way and some return worse than before, all thanks to the IMF and the World Bank. Although the money was returned to them, right, that is to the World Bank, the IMF, the countries still owe them. That is why most developing countries owe the World Bank and the IMF huge amounts of loans. And sometimes you hear about debt cancellation, and you may think that they forgive poor countries their debts, but that's not how it works in reality. The World Bank and the IMF never forgive, and because of the huge debt developing countries owe the World Bank, they, the World Bank and the IMF, control almost all the affairs of these poor countries. In other words, if you don't obey what the World Bank and the IMF say, then you must pay back the debt. And because you cannot pay back the debt, you must obey whatever they tell you to do. Any leader who doesn't obey the World Bank and the IMF, the WTO, etc., is considered a terrorist. And in some cases, you find that they are somehow assassinated. For example, When there was an oil discovery in a developing country that owes the World Bank, and the leader of that developing country is not ready to cooperate, the World Bank and company quickly get rid of such a leader, sometimes through war, just like what happened in Iraq. The World Bank then elects their own obedient leaders to rule those poor countries so that they, the World Bank and company, can easily control that country's economy and market. The World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, triple enemies of Africa and the African people. We have the moral responsibility to know and to teach our students, our children, our friends, and everyone who ignores the dirty geopolitics and the games of the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO. That's my take. It's your turn. 465-2555, 718-577-2916 is the phone number, and it's your time to weigh in here on Frank and Candid. Let's go to the phones. Say good morning quickly. Welcome to Frank and Candid.
Good morning, Mr. Knight.
Good morning, sir.
And how are you today?
I am doing well.
I say Ashe, the triple aspect. But I can quadruple it. The World Health Organization. For the World Health Organization. But that's a conversation for another day. Case in point, the Ghana airline was told by the British aviation authorities that no longer would they able to accommodate them at Gatwick, which is in London. They will have to reroute and go all the way to Heathrow, 50 miles away. The Ghanaian authority did not take it lightly. They said, okay, because of this bullying tactics, you want to reroute my flight from Gatwick to Heathrow, 50 miles away? No problem. The British Airways that is coming into Ghana is not going to fly into Accra, the capital. They're going to fly into Kumasi, not 100 miles away. Did not the British authority rescind it? If you are going to be bullied in your own home, you will come to the table and allow what you cook, your meal you cook, and put it on the table, and allow your adversaries to come have a nice eat and wait for the crumbs from that. Another case in point, the gentleman, Dr. Adesina from Nigeria, who is the big man in the African Bank, African Development Bank, who got such a fight to be re-elected the other day. He was the agricultural minister of Nigeria. He decided to stop the Monsanto seeds that was coming in, the GMO seeds that was coming into Nigeria, especially with certain commodities like tomatoes, cotton crops. And he reversed that. They did not like it. I mean, this is the bullying tactics that we have to face. So it is good that we start to educate, and people need to listen. Because you spoke about Ghana. You know how many of us are here are descendants from the Akan tribe and the Ewe and the Ga, Adangbe, and all those tribes? It's not just restricted to Ghana. We are Yorubas and all those different people that are in a melting pot, which we will fight to. I divert because I want to get back to something that Mrs. Henry said on the program on Tuesday, which is including, rightly so, the Jews, and she was talking about their here and on neighbors, but specifically St. Kitts. There is a village called Lambert Village. Fisher Lambert was probably the last owner of that village down when you're going west. Lambert Village, that's Jewish in origin. I also want to make a point at the Lloyds of London, that acclaimed financial institution, had estates on St. Kitts and Montserrat So not only the Codringtons in Barbados, there's also the Codringtons in Barbuda, Antigua and Barbuda. And there's an interconnection. Like Gibbons, Nicholas Gibbons at Gibbons Estate in Gateway, had Gibbons plantation in Barbados also. So you can see the interconnection. And the same Codrington Estate in Barbados. There is a family that had a property on Independence Square.
Okay, we got another call. Let's wrap up.
Certain connections. And so I'm just trying to make the link here. Thanks for listening.
Got you.
I continue to listen.
Thank you.
But interesting and continue.
Sure. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome to Frank and Candid.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Nayas.
Good morning.
Good morning, Africa. It's good to
morning.
have somebody studying the history. Now, you see what you're talking about, the World Bank and IMF and so? Lack of knowledge among our people. I went to the IMF to be trained twice. I went 1993 and I did national accounts. I went 1999 and I did balance of payments. And the things I learned is because we don't know. Even with this debt cancellation, how it doesn't really go away and you could actually end up paying more. I learned all that, you know. I went to India again, and as I said, the man who was the former head of the WTO, I think it's Pradesh, was an oldish man, and he was in India fighting the WTO, eh? Our people lack knowledge and negotiating skills. Is that, you know? We lack knowledge of how the system works, and we lack negotiating skills. Because I recall sometime in the 1990-something or 2000, well, the IMF used to come every 2 years before Labour, and after the economy started to get a little worse, they would come every year. And more than once I had to dress them down, you know. I remember one time they came and were saying, you know, they want to lend the country. I am neither Prime Minister nor Minister of Finance, you know. I asked them, who tell you we want any more loan? Who tell you so? You understand? Because they come and they offer them to you. They make suggestions. And sometimes our leaders, because they lack the skill and they don't know the workings of the system, they take loans that they don't need. They take conditions that they can't put on anybody else. So sometimes we have to blame ourselves. I went to the USA in 1986, I think it was, on a workshop called Exporting to the USA, where they brought people from the Caribbean, right? Because, you know, you had the Caribbean basin.
Right.
And we learned, there are people from different islands, how they were blockading the people goods and whatnot. And what we need to practice and to learn are the ways in which they subsidize the farmers and use the same tactic. We're using the plain old ones. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We need knowledge and experience, and I encourage the country and the governments, send their people to train. A lot of these training courses are free. World Bank, if you read it, the discussion and the debates, even Trump was trying to put one of his people as the head of the World Bank. Now, if you don't know, and they come here, you see privatization, I was objecting to it, you know. When I went to India, it was structural, whatever they call it, for the IMF, to deal with the recession. And they were talking, privatize the electricity, privatize the water. All of these push up the cost, and poor people got to bear them. Yeah. But our governments are afraid sometimes to stand up.
Okay.
And they don't know their own power.
All right.
All right, then.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome to Frank and Candid.
Greetings in the name of our great African ancestors, especially the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and Queen Anne. God bless them, my beloved African. But how are you, the family?
Oh, we're doing well. How are you?
Good, man, and the clan is good, my beloved brother. Great topic. And let me big up my Pan-Africanist brother, the first caller, Brother Africa, and then Queen Mother Henry. beautiful, beautiful, knowledgeable system. Beloved, you lay out the thing there. Like I always said, beloved, the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO, but especially the World Bank, beloved brother. And the IMF, I call them an international murders fund. And I ain't going to take back that, beloved, because that's what they are. And you heard to say, beloved, the kind of austerity measures they put on pressures on our people, man. You know, you got to privatize your water, your electricity, and this and that. All kind of pressure just for some crumbs, beloved. And when you ain't comply, they assassinate you, they assassinate the country economically, or they assassinate the leaders or the administration who stand up for their people. And we see what they did to the great Kwame Nkrumah and others, Patrice Lumumba and others, beloved. Oh, brothers, I don't know if you're familiar with this book. It was written by a Caucasian. He was part of them, of the Cabal. Confession of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins.
Yes, sir.
But when you read that book, and this is not coming from African person, this is coming from a Caucasian who was part of the Cabal, beloved. But it will make you want to bring tears to your eyes. And just, man, but that book is just, which we know. As Pan-Africanists and other knowledgeable people, they know kind of pressure. That's why I say, beloved, I'm not saying that our people don't have those misleaders and have something to do. They have, but most of our problem is because of evil Caucasians, beloved. I'm not saying all Caucasians is the same. I get no apology. I'm not no apologist. But the vast majority of them, and especially these people, IMF, WTO, World Bank, all of them and countries in North America and Europe, beloved, look what my brother Africa said about the airline, the Ghanaian airline. My brother, I am telling you, right now, beloved, I am trying to find out if the church, Anglican Church, own all of those lands in the Pan-African Republic of DB, because we're going to get started, brother, with a petition that our people is on those lands, who African blood is soaking those lands forever, that those lands must be transferred to the people. Where the hell the Anglican Church get all of that land from? Brother, I gonna make sure, I just doing some investigation and make sure all of that happen. Beloved, like I said, man, our people, we got to wake up, beloved sisters and brothers, internationally. We must wake up and unite on all fronts. We're not the 100% a unity. Never will ever get that. But instead of fighting, not me, instead of fighting each other down, beloved brother, we must come collectively and unite as African people now more than ever. Brother, continue to listen, keep up the great works. Pan-Africanism our place. Well, love, my beloved brother.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for your input. All right. A whole lot there. Yeah. The truth is that those organizations don't really have a good history. But they come bearing gifts. You know, we remember the history and the experience of Jamaica with the IMF. And we will talk about that sometime here on this program later on. But let's not forget. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome.
Good day, Mr. Nass.
Good day.
Yes. I noticed you were very careful to say at the outset that some people do not like to hear the history. And you correctly mentioned the reasons for the state that African countries find themselves in. You know, he mentioned the colonialism, the exploitation of their resources by multinational corporations, the corruption of the leaders, and the societies as a whole.
Several reasons, yeah.
Yeah, and the role of international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO that basically serves the interests of the metropolitan financiers. Okay, they are the ones who really started the IMF and those organizations and financed them. Okay, and it's for their interest more than that of poor countries. Right? It has nothing to do with negotiation skills. Caribbean technocrats and leaders are some of the most educated and skilled people anywhere. Nobody can out-talk them. Okay? But there are some other reasons, I think, that need to be looked at. For a long time, African countries allowed themselves to be drawn into the geopolitical struggle. You know, the struggle of the isms. Socialism, communism, and capitalism, okay? And that was essentially between the developed countries and, well, East and West, really, okay? And as a result, they got squeezed. You can't have development where the people of a country is at war with each other, or they are surrogates of the developed countries in their competition with one another. It can't happen. Right? You can't have development in an atmosphere like that, right? And another reason is that these same powers promote internal conflict, where they use factions to promote their own interests rather than the interests of the country. We saw that here in the CBI, right? Where, I mean, although it was bringing in so much money, you know, there were factions in the country that were dead set against its operation, okay? Because, as the North Americans and Europeans are saying, it was basically, they used the excuse that, well, illicit actors, etc., was going to get involved, okay? Without that actually happening on any great scale. I mean, the regular banking system had more illicit actors than our CBI. But the fact is, they promoted the division in the country over something like that, even though it did so much to us, to help us. Okay? So, but the more important question, right, is what are we going back at the history and trying to determine the root causes of things like this. And it should be not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to pull ourselves up from our own, by our own bootstraps as far as possible. We know we don't have big capital markets here, but there are ways that we can certainly attract capital, all right, and enter into partnerships that have our interests and not other people's interests in mind. And I think the start of all that is to have a unified visionary leadership who are going to see long term and who know the history, okay, and are not going to repeat the mistakes of the past and look after our interests. That's what I think is needed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. You know, the IMF has this MO that they tend to be against or discourage your social programs. If you're ever caught in the claws of the IMF, you have to now agree to cease certain social programs that you felt were essential to your people's sustainability. You have to cut this out, stop that out, stop subsidies that you might, as in the case of Ghana, stop the subsidies, stop this, stop the social program, because that's not where their interests lie, that's not their agenda. So, I mean, gotta be careful when we get in the hands of the IMF. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning, welcome.
Yeah, good morning.
Yes.
It's interesting what the last caller said. He's making an excuse for incompetence, you know. Now, a lot of our leaders put our countries in those positions. Everybody offered them a loan. I remember you and Dad carry Festa. This Trinidad bank, I mean, they bleed the country. They borrowed money to build houses for Carrie Festa. That's why 11 or 12% to be repaid. I think they borrowed almost 21 million to be repaid in a year. So they go out there and they borrow at these exorbitant rates, when in fact sometimes if they manage the economy better, more can be done. But you see, politics is a thing. You want to build so many houses in a short time. You must first know where you're going to get the capital and how do you spread it. But people do things to get vote. And in relation to the CBI, there is nobody to blame but the administration, you know. If you have people who were coming in under all kind of suspicious things, you must know the system. You had the economic, you had financial embargo on Iran. If your people know these things, therefore, nobody should have to warn you, because even it was done in Europe and the USA had a financial embargo on Iran and on Russia, and they're selling passport to them. We do things to ourselves, but a lot of us, I am saying knowledge, lack of knowledge. We don't educate our people. It isn't everything people want to give them, you know. I keep saying that. Our government sometimes become a welfare state. You go in this rice. Look, sometimes we need to change the market or the marketing strategy. We were producing sugar. We were actually giving away sugar. And for years, they wouldn't close it down. I mean, we were producing at 50 cents a pound. I'm not asking, I'm telling, because I used to work on financial accounts. And we were getting 25%, 25 cents a pound. And people were up there popping champagne, thinking, oh, we're trying to preserve labor. That is what drove us to the IMF, you know. Nobody with no shop or no store can do that. And there are ways of designing welfare programs. You go to India, you see. There are ways, and a lot of our leaders are corrupt. Very corrupt. Sometimes they know what they're getting into, but they hope that, well, in case I lose the election. They know. And that's why I say, you got these technocrats, train them. Give them courses in ideology and let them go to the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO and see the inner workings. Then you could come back and tell your leader, look, that thing sound good, you know. That thing sound good, but this is the trap. Because you're in there, they are infiltrators, you know that, right? Mm-hmm. They infiltrate our countries. I recall one of them came here as a Peace Corps.
Peace Corps.
You hear me? And I used to challenge him, say, look, let me tell you, don't go near my computer, because my computer has confidential information. Mm-hmm. And he coming in and one time he tell me, oh, well, I have access to the treasury. I say, you crazy? How they could allow you to do that? I used to say, but you're working for the CIA, you won't come in here. And would you believe, when I went to the IMF in 1993, or 99, the man was working in the IMF. I said, they tell me, oh, you know, you must go and meet you. I said, boy, a long time I know that's what you're doing. They said, you want lunch? Me, I want no lunch. I don't want no lunch. I tell you a long time, you are a spy. And our leaders got them, they come here as VSO or kind of thing. What you can't see, they see. You know that? Yeah. When you can't see, they see, so they know the inner workings. They encourage you, oh, you know, you can get an easy loan. You see, with Corona, they were offering loans. You notice that? Mm. They're offering all the Caribbean countries loans. They're already in debt. They're already in debt up to the neck, eh?
Okay.
Our people need to learn how to negotiate, Mr. McMahon. When you can't negotiate, you get the worst part of the deal.
Okay.
All right then.
All right. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome to Frank and Candid.
Mr. Niasen back.
Yes.
There has been a resurgence. And guess who has started that resurgence? What voice? The voice of Queen Mothers. Like Mrs. Henry, Queen Mother Henry. Dr. Arikana Chirambori Kwao. She was the ambassador to the AU, to the Americas in the diaspora. And she exposed the $500 billion annual dollars that comes from those francophone countries to France. That's the enormity of the type of money that has been pumped into the French economy that has them to be a first world country. It was Jacques Chirac who said that France would be a third world country had it not been for those African francophone countries. Their last attempt was to hijack the ECO, a currency that the ECOWAS in West Africa approved to be the model of the currencies to, make a start. But back to Ghana, as you spoke about Ghana. Recently, President Nana Akufo-Addo said that no longer, and he was addressing the lady from, I think it's the lady who is President, whatever name she is called by, of Switzerland, that no longer would they be exporting cocoa beans. Between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, former Ivory Coast, I think it's about 60 to 70% of the cocoa beans are exported. And those two countries have comes up with a plan now to industrialize that industry and produce cocoa, chocolate on their own, and all things chocolate. So there are concerted efforts. We have seen that effort even on the East Coast. John Pombe Magufuli have financed so many projects out of his own resources and is the model and will be the model forever for the African continent going forward. And we have seen what demise he has met. Such is our story. And so the struggle continues, concerted efforts continue, but we will get it right. We will get it right.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Hopefully. Back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Tony, and all the others who are listening.
Good morning.
And I am grateful, thankful for the previous callers, which makes sense in everything they said. Now, let me elaborate on St. Kitts and Nevis and other Caribbean countries, or to whom it may concern, can listen to this. First of all, we have to be self-resilient. Whatever we could produce, whatever we could attract. And we would be a sales marketing model for what we could generate, just like the IMF or any other financial institution. But you know what? People have to be knowledgeable. What is available? Government have to be transparent to each and every citizen of their nation. You see, there are a lot of secrecy deal. Government expect to represent the people. But who put them into power? The people. So the people should be know of what is going on into the country, what comes in and what goes out. Because if they are not transparent, they make their deals, and you hear the nation is in bankruptcy, this amount of money. When they get these amount of money as loans, does the individual citizen know about it? No, because they are not transferable. So people got to rise up, be knowledgeable, be able to negotiate, and negotiate with the government. Remember, the government is the people, and the people is who put the government there. They got to be transparent and training. Okay? And that is the problem. If you depend upon everyone, like you have a basket under a mango tree, waiting for a mango to be dropped. Brother, no, it's not all the time a mango going to drop in your basket, you know. And by the time when you look, 100 mangoes drop, only one you caught in your basket, and that one lead you to destruction. People of St. Kitts and Nevis, learn negotiation skills, be proactive, be inquisitive, and that have to come from within yourself moving forward. That's my advice. I am a negotiator. I am a single individual in the United States. I make my own money. I make my price. I negotiate. You need it? Well, pay me. But you could negotiate still, but don't be trapped. Because that's the cry to a lot of nations. They are trapped because they ignore what they have and go way over and miles away to grab when they could use their own resources and their own skills and technique.
Okay.
That's my input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For your input. Back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome.
Yes, a point, Mr. Myers. We manage the CBI to serve our interests, not anybody else's, right? And if what we were doing was so egregious, why we don't just return the money and shut down the program? No, that can't happen. We can't eat our cake and still have it, okay? And you notice, even though there have been changes in the program, even though we bend over backwards to suit the developed countries, there's still pressures on our programs, okay? They will always do that because they view us as competitors as well, okay? Keep us poor and dependent on them. That is how they became rich, and that is how they stay rich, all right? It's interesting that Mrs. Henry mentioned the sugar industry. You know when the debt spiral actually started? When the current Prime Minister was Minister of Agriculture, and he pumped millions into recapitalizing that dying industry. It was going down, but they tried to save it. That is when the debt spiral started, all right? And we have to be careful about, sure, the IMF, we know that the IMF and the World Bank, WTO, do not represent our interests, but we contribute to these organizations. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong if we benefit from them as well. Okay, we have to keep our options open. That's part of smart negotiating as well. Don't just close all the doors, and then when it comes down to a crunch, you have no options, all right? And even though they do have tough prescriptions, generally they work, You notice that after we went to the IMF, we emerged better than our neighbors from the world recession, even though we had to undergo some pain in the process, right? So what I'm saying is be smart, okay, and use whatever is out there to serve our interests, regardless of what it might be. We just have to be smart about it. Okay.
All right. Question is, did we really benefit when civil servants had to forego any increase for a period of time, and this had to stop and that had to stop? I don't know. Did we really benefit? I don't know. Let's go back to the phones. Good morning.
Yes, my brother Nabo here again. Brother, we as African people must do internationally too. We must develop Pan-African think tanks, brother. And we must have 100 years plan. Regardless of what administration come, they must adhere to that plan. We adjust as we go along. Because if we say, okay, we're going to build 10 houses, say in the Federation. I'm just using the Federation, St. Kitts Navy. And then you see there's a need for 20. You adjust. But in that Pan-Africanist think tank, we must have old people, middle-aged people, and young people, beloved. So we have a cross-section, age, generation gap, beloved. We can't just think for 5 years in the next election. That ain't going to get us nowhere as African people. We must have 100 years plan, and we must have Pan-African think tanks internationally on the African continent, and we collaborate with each other around the world, beloved brothers. That's what we must do. And it cannot be all men either. Nowhere. I against that. It must be be gender equality. Must have sisters and brothers, the best among our people, both sisters and brothers. You see, because in some Pan-Africanist movement too, it's just too many male-dominated, man. Come on. But that's not African. That's Eurocentric mentality. We must have sisters along with us, beloved. Gender equality. Can't get this Eurocentric male just dominate every phase. Just like, no! I against that, and it should never be. We need gender equality among Pan-African think tanks, beloved. Beloved, continue to listen. Pan-Africanism our perish. One love, my beloved brother.
Okay, one love. Okay, let's go back to the phones. Good morning.
Yes, good morning.
Yes.
Just some little information for Mr. McMahon. Cedric Liebert was the Minister of Agriculture. You know, so he said Harris was too. But Cedric, even the train, they brought in, had mills and everything. Now, let me get to the IMF and to show you our people don't understand anything. Now, we both said we raised 1 billion, right? On the SIDF. But we only borrowed 200 and something from the IMF. Does that make sense? Not only that, we had a debt restructuring program. We went to the Paris Club, if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't get any relief.
Right.
The Americans said, well, your per capita is too high. I think only 5 something we had owed them. The UK, the same thing. But the majority of the debt was domestic. So who suffered when we went? We suffered. The IMF said, look, Treasury bills cut that, bonds cut that, the National Bank lost millions, Social Security millions, the domestic market suffered. Then they said, well, lay off the people. Now, couldn't we have used the same money that we give over the Peninsula and Kittitian Hill and other enterprises to keep our people working? We were denied promotion, denied any kind of increment, but we still boast that we had 1 something billion because we can't plan. We go abroad, people say, well, the debt, 70% of the debt was here, you know. We have the one down La Valley. At Trinidad Bank had a lot of our debt. You think they write off any? No, we don't know how to negotiate. Because the truth is, if we were properly managing the economy, we wouldn't have to go through all that stress because, as Mr. McMahon said, we were raising money like dirt. But where did it go? Where did the money go? And to suggest that is, somehow they started getting donation. But we were still, once you put your foot in the program, you know, we just say homemade. I tell people, done with the homemade. I was trained by the IMF, and I could tell you. The man who came in from Caltech to train us, he was one of the Western Hemisphere economic leader, whatever. The IMF and the World Bank sent their man to train you, you understand? And all the VAT answer was suggested by them to cut the deficit. But they kept, we could always go to the IMF. You can't blame the IMF for what you do for yourself, you know. I tell you, if you don't know, you could cut your own throat. When courts and hospital and police, they say, you can come and take out a fridge and you don't pay for 3 months. You walk home with the idea, well, me know them. Really? They cut their own throat, poor fiscal management.
All right.
The country did not have to go to the IMF.
Gotcha.
All right, then.
All right. Back to the phones. Good morning. Welcome.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, just to share a little bit here, because a caller before spoke about that we subscribe to the IMF and the World Bank, and so when we are in need, we should go to them and benefit from them. But that's true in principle. But when we have looked at the IMF and the World Bank over years, we should see what has happened to other countries, and really we should avoid going to them. And I think some of our countries, like the African countries, I think they got themselves into a situation with poor management. And by the time they got into the World Bank and IMF, they were really wrapped around.
Yep.
Now, St. Kitts and Nevis, for a long time, we were very good, in a very good position. And I think we did made some strategic poor decisions that caused us to accumulate debt and have to go to them. Now, I can give you a particular experience to show you how they work. What has saved St. Kitts and most of the other Caribbean countries in the OECS area is that we have a common currency. Because for years, the IMF was trying to get us to devalue.
Yes.
I can remember a gentleman, some people might remember, Clarence Ellis from Guyana. He was brought by the IMF to work with the central bank, the ECCA, the central bank at the time. But he was a CARICOM person first, because he used to actually be with the CARICOM community. And he spoke of how the IMF tried every which way to get one country in the OAS to devalue. And they will go to Antigua, and Antigua will say, well, I don't have any currency. I don't have a dollar, EC dollar. And they'll come to St. Kitts and St. Kitts and say, well, I don't have it. Because under the rules of the central bank, all the member states must be unanimous in terms of any change in the value. And that is how come, because they're all sovereign states, that's how come the IMF was not able to get them to devalue. And that has been our strength. That has been the anchor, as the late former governor of the central bank would say. That has been our anchor, Dwight Venner. But back to the problem about the debt. We did not need or should not have gotten into that position. However, thank God we got out of it. And I think through the CIF program, we were able to get ourselves out of it. But I agree with some of the callers that first and foremost, we must know the value of what we have and use our resources to the extent possible to get ourselves out of things and manage properly so that we don't have to get into the claws, of some of these agencies, international agencies. Right. Thank you.
All right. Speaking of devaluations, you can speak to Jamaicans about that. All right. Go back to the phones. Good morning. Getting close to wrap up. We got a final call? No? Okay. All right. No caller. Okay, great. So, all in all, what this is about is our responsibility, moral responsibility to know and learn as much as we can, and then to teach our students, our children, our friends, and everyone who ignore the dirty games. We need to know of the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO. All right, we gotta go. So if we got somebody who's on hold here, if that person can take 30 seconds, we'll give you 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Brother Tony, we got to thank God we got people like Sylvie Henry around still as a woman to educate this nation. Because some of us should have mislead, because some of us don't like to listen, and even some of us could read, we don't try to understand. We got to thank God for people like her. And Washington Archibald, God bless his soul, well, he was one educator too, educating the people to this nation about our politics. And Mother Sylvie Henry, my number is 766-3310.
All right.
766-3310.
Gotta go. All right. Thank you all for your calls, your comments, suggestions, opinions, and another good discussion. A lot of passion across the board. And we're here just to provide you the information, and a lot of it you can get for yourself. It's all there. All right. We will talk again tomorrow, if it is to be, right here on Frank and Candid. I'm Tony Nass. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Shipping your cargo shouldn't be a hassle. It can be as easy as a single call to Amerijet International, your world